My name is Sophia Bennett, 32 years old, and my entire life almost fell apart when my uncle declared that family business was only for real family at our Christmas dinner. The truth is, I've been secretly keeping the Kingsley construction empire afloat for years, and not a single person at that table knew I was their biggest investor. After spending my childhood being reminded I wasn't real Kingsley blood, Uncle Richard had the audacity to raise his glass and announce that only true heirs would ever lead the company. My adoptive cousins smirked across the table, while Aunt Martha squeezed my hand under the tablecloth, her silent way of apologizing for her husband's cruelty. Richard thought, I would accept it quietly like always, but this time he went too far. The consequences would reach far beyond what any of them could imagine. Before I continue my story, let me explain how we got here. I was adopted by the Kingsleys when I was 4 after my parents died in a car accident. My mother had been Richard's sister, but the family never quite embraced me as their own. Blood runs deeper than paperwork, Uncle Richard would say, whenever I tried to participate in family traditions. I grew up watching my cousins, James, Tyler, and Veronica, being groomed to take over the family construction business, while I was pushed to the sidelines. My achievements were footnotes, my ideas dismissed. When I graduated with honors in business and technology, Uncle Richard gave me a pat on the head and said, "That's nice, Sophia, but it's not like you'll need it for the family business." What he didn't know was that I had been building my own fortune since college. My tech startup revolutionized architectural software, creating AI systems that could optimize construction projects and reduce costs by nearly 40%. By the time I was 28, I had sold my company for $850 million and started an investment firm. 3 years ago, I discovered through industry connections that Kingsley Construction was on the verge of bankruptcy. Poor management by my cousins had driven the company into massive debt. Without telling anyone, I created a shell corporation and became their anonymous angel investor, injecting $175 million to save the business my grandfather had built. I didn't do it for gratitude. I did it because despite everything, I still remembered Grandpa Joseph telling me stories about building his first house. The pride in his voice when he described creating something that would shelter generations. The company was his legacy, and I couldn't let it crumble because of pride and prejudice. For 3 years, I attended board meetings as Ms. K from Aurora Investments. My cousins never recognized me behind my professional demeanor and designer suits, so different from the little Sophia they mocked at family gatherings. I watched them take credit for the company's miraculous turnaround while implementing my suggested strategies. The irony wasn't lost on me when Uncle Richard bragged about James's business genius at family dinners, unaware that his precious son was merely following my roadmap. I said nothing, bided my time, continued to build my own empire in the shadows until that Christmas dinner. I had just finalized the paperwork for another $200 million investment into Kingsley Construction, funds they desperately needed for an upcoming government contract. The deal would be announced in January, effectively making me the majority shareholder. When Uncle Richard clinked his glass and stood up at the head of the table, I expected the usual Christmas toast about family tradition and legacy. Instead, he launched into an announcement about the company's succession plan. "As we close out another successful year at Kingsley Construction," he said, chest puffed with pride, "it's time we discuss the future. The board and I have decided that leadership will transition to James next year, with Tyler heading operations and Veronica managing client relations." My cousins beamed while I maintained a neutral expression, sipping my wine. "This company was built by Kingsley blood and will continue under Kingsley blood," he continued, his eyes briefly flicking toward me. "Family business is for real family, after all." The table fell silent. My aunt stared at her plate. Even James had the decency to look uncomfortable. Uncle Richard raised his glass higher, oblivious to the tension. "To keeping Kingsley Construction in the hands of true Kingsleys for generations to come." Glasses clinked around the table. I raised mine with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Little did my uncle know that by this time tomorrow, I would reveal exactly who had been keeping his precious legacy alive all these years, and watch as his empire of lies came tumbling down around him. The rest of Christmas dinner passed in a blur of forced smiles and hollow laughter. I excused myself early, claiming a headache. Nobody seemed particularly bothered by my departure, except Aunt Martha, who followed me to the foyer. "Sophia, sweetheart," she whispered, glancing back toward the dining room to ensure we were alone. "Richard doesn't mean half the things he says. You know how he gets after a few drinks." I smiled sadly. Aunt Martha had always been kind, but her kindness came wrapped in silence. She never had the courage to stand up to her husband. "It's fine, Aunt Martha," I said softly. "I'm just tired." I kissed her cheek and left. Driving through the quiet city streets, memories flooded my mind. Every cruel dismissal. Every time I'd been reminded that I wasn't real family. I remembered being 10 years old, proudly showing Uncle Richard my school project, a small bridge made of popsicle sticks that won first prize in the science fair. "Nice effort, Sophia," he had said. "But you've got to understand, you don't have Kingsley blood. It's sweet that you're trying, though." That phrase, "you don't have Kingsley blood," became the background noise of my childhood. At 16, I'd asked if I could intern at the company during summer break. James had smirked. "The internship program's for family members who'll actually work here someday." At 22, I'd offered to modernize the company's outdated systems. Uncle Richard turned me down and instead hired a consultant who implemented half my ideas for 10 times the cost. No matter how much I achieved, I'd never be family in their eyes. By the time I reached my penthouse, my sadness had hardened into determination. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, Grandpa Joseph's favorite, and stared out through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city skyline. Somewhere down there stood the Kingsley construction headquarters, the building my grandfather had designed himself. I picked up my phone and dialed my attorney, Simon Palmer. "It's Christmas, Sophia," he answered, laughter and music in the background. "I know, I'm sorry, but I need you to prepare the paperwork. I'm pulling the trigger." There was silence on the line. "Are you sure?" Simon asked finally. "Once this happens, there's no going back." "I'm sure," I said, my voice steady. "Execute everything first thing tomorrow. And Simon, I want to be there when the news is delivered." The next morning, I dressed with precision, a charcoal suit, pearl earrings that had belonged to my birth mother, and the red-soled heels I reserved for major deals. Today wasn't just another business day. Today, I was reclaiming my place in the world. The Kingsley construction building was quiet, most employees away for the holidays. But I knew Uncle Richard would be there. He always bragged about working through Christmas as proof of his Kingsley work ethic. Simon met me in the lobby, a briefcase in hand. "Everything's ready," he said. "As of 9 a.m., Aurora Investments has officially withdrawn all funding and called in its loans to Kingsley Construction. Effective immediately." "And the identity revelation?" I asked. "Press release goes out in 1 hour. The world will know that Sophia Bennett, not Ms. Kent, has been the real savior of Kingsley." "Construction for 3 years?" My heart pounded. As we took the elevator up to the executive floor, Uncle Richard's assistant wasn't in, so we walked straight into his office. "Come in," his voice barked from behind the door. He looked up from his desk, surprise flickering across his face when he saw me, and confusion when he noticed Simon. "Sophia? What's this about? And who's this?" "Uncle Richard," I began calmly. "This is my attorney, Simon Palmer. We're here because there's something you should know about Aurora Investments." His brows furrowed. "Aurora, the firm funding our expansion? What about them?" I met his gaze directly. "I founded Aurora Investments 5 years ago after selling my tech company. I'm the CEO, the same Ms. K you've been dealing with all this time. I've been the one keeping Kingsley Construction alive for the past 3 years." His color drained instantly. That's not possible." "It's very possible," I replied. "I've attended every board meeting, approved every loan, directed every strategy that saved this company from collapse after James and Tyler nearly destroyed it." Richard pushed his chair back abruptly, face pale. "If this is some kind of joke..." Simon stepped forward, opening his briefcase and setting a thick folder on the desk. "These are the original investment agreements, all signed by Ms. Bennett. And these," he added, placing another stack beside them, "are the formal notices withdrawing all funding, effective immediately." Richard stared at the documents, his face cycling from disbelief to anger. And finally, fear. "You can't do this," he whispered. "The government contract, and we need that capital." "Family business is for real family," I said evenly, echoing his words from last night. "Isn't that right, Uncle Richard?" For the first time in my life, Richard Kingsley had no words. I turned to leave. "Wait," he called, voice trembling. "Sophia, let's talk about this. There must be some misunderstanding." I stopped, turning back slowly. "Misunderstanding?" I said. "You've spent 28 years reminding me that I don't belong. You made yourself perfectly clear." He gestured toward a chair. "Please, sit down. Let's discuss this like adults." I sat, legs crossed, calm as ever. Simon stood behind me, silent and watchful. "Sophia," Richard began, rubbing his temple. "Family and business. They're complicated. Sometimes things are said for the sake of appearances, for investors. Save it." I cut him off. "This isn't about what you said last night. It's about what you've always said. You were happy to take my money when you didn't know it was mine. You were happy to praise my strategies when you thought they came from someone else. The only thing you couldn't stand was that they came from me." He flinched, speechless. "That's not fair," he muttered weakly. "Neither was telling a child she'll never belong because of blood," I replied, my tone like ice. The room fell silent except for the ticking of his office clock. "Do you know what Grandpa Joseph told me before he died?" I asked quietly. Richard looked up sharply. He said, "Sophia, this company isn't about bricks and mortar. It's about building foundations for people to grow on." "Dad was sentimental," Richard said stiffly. "Business requires tough decisions." "Like the decision to nearly bankrupt his company?" I asked. "Or the one where you let James use that faulty supplier because they were golf buddies?" His eyes widened. "How did you—" "I know everything," I interrupted. "Every bad deal, every cover-up, every time you failed Grandpa's legacy." He looked at me with something between guilt and awe. "And yet," I said, standing up, "you had the audacity to tell me this family business is only for real family." By the next morning, the world knew my name, Sophia Bennett, the hidden heir who saved Kingsley Construction. Every major business outlet had picked up the story. My inbox overflowed with partnership offers, investor inquiries, and interview requests. Some called me ruthless, others called me brilliant. I didn't care which one stuck, because for the first time, I was finally being seen. But while the world celebrated, the Kingsleys were falling apart. By noon, my phone buzzed again. Aunt Martha. "Sophia, your uncle is in shock," she said softly. "The board is demanding answers. The bank froze company accounts until they verify Aurora's withdrawal notice. He doesn't know what to do." I could almost hear the chaos behind her voice. Phones ringing, papers shuffling, panic spreading. "He'll figure it out," I said. "He always said he didn't need anyone's help." "Please, Sophia," she whispered. "Come by tonight." "Just talk to him," I paused. Part of me wanted to hang up. The other part, the one that still remembered the warmth in her hugs when I was little, couldn't say no. "All right," I said quietly. "I'll come." That evening, I returned to the Kingsley mansion for the first time since Christmas. Snow blanketed the long driveway. The house that had once felt like a fortress now looked like a museum. Cold, lifeless, full of ghosts. Aunt Martha opened the door, her eyes tired but kind. "He's in the study," she said softly. I walked in to find Uncle Richard sitting by the fireplace, a half-empty glass of scotch in his hand. The flames flickered across his face, a mix of pride, regret, and defeat. He didn't look up right away. "So," he finally said, his voice rough, "you've made quite a name for yourself." "Seems that way," I replied, sitting across from him. A long silence hung between us. The only sound was the crackling of the fire. "You destroyed me," he said at last. "No," I said firmly. "I exposed the truth. You destroyed yourself when you decided that blood was more important than ability." He looked into his glass. "You sound just like my father," he muttered. That caught me off guard. "Grandpa Joseph?" He nodded slowly. "He told me once that a family name means nothing without the heart behind it." I thought he was being sentimental. I see now. He was right. For the first time in my life, Richard Kingsley, the man who had made me feel like a stranger in my own family, looked small, human. "You are the best of us, Sophia," he said quietly. And I was too proud to see it. His words didn't erase the years of hurt, but for a brief moment, they mattered. "So what happens now?" he asked. "Aurora is taking control," I said. "The board will vote on new leadership next week. I'm prepared to step in temporarily until the company stabilizes." He nodded slowly. "It should be you. It always should have been." I studied him carefully. "That's not what you said last week." A bitter smile touched his lips. "Last week I still believed in bloodlines. Today I believe in survival." We both laughed quietly, though there was no joy in it, only exhaustion. I stood up to leave, but he called after me. "Sophia," I turned. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said, "but thank you for saving what my father built." For a long moment, I didn't speak. Then softly I said, "You didn't just lose a company. Uncle, you lost me a long time ago." And with that, I walked out, closing the chapter that had haunted me for 28 years. 3 months later, Kingsley Construction was reborn under Aurora Holdings, a modern, tech-driven, sustainability-focused enterprise. I stood on stage at the company's relaunch event, facing hundreds of employees and reporters. "When I was a child," I began, "I was told I didn't belong in this family, that I didn't have Kingsley blood. Maybe that was true. But I've learned that family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by legacy. And today we build a new one." The room erupted in applause. Cameras flashed. Somewhere in the back row, I spotted Aunt Martha, smiling proudly through tears. And just for a moment, I could almost feel my grandfather's hand on my shoulder, his voice whispering, "You did good, kid." That night, back in my penthouse, I poured a final glass of whiskey and stood by the window overlooking the city. The skyline dotted with cranes, towers, and buildings. My buildings. I thought of all the years I spent proving myself, of every door that had been slammed in my face, and every time I'd been told I wasn't real family. Now, I didn't need to prove anything. I had rewritten what it meant to be a Kingsley, not by blood, but by strength. And as snow fell softly over the city, I whispered one last time, "Here's to building something real." 6 months had passed since the day I took control of Kingsley Construction. 6 months since I walked out of my uncle's office and into a new life, one built not from bloodlines, but from grit, forgiveness, and faith in myself. The business world had crowned me the Queen of Reinvention. Aurora Holdings had expanded into 3 countries, and Kingsley Construction was thriving again, greener, smarter, and stronger than ever. But success, I learned, doesn't silence every ghost. Sometimes, late at night, I would still hear the echo of Uncle Richard's voice. Family business is for real family. And every time I heard it, I would remind myself how wrong he'd been. It was a Sunday afternoon in early summer when Aunt Martha called again. Her voice trembled. "Sophia, your uncle isn't well." My chest tightened. "What do you mean?" "The stress, the fallout. His heart's weak. He keeps asking for you." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. The part of me that had spent years craving his approval felt nothing. But the part that had grown, the part that had learned compassion from my late mother and strength from my grandfather, knew I had to go. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and faint lilies. Uncle Richard looked smaller than I remembered. Pale, fragile, the proud patriarch replaced by an aging man humbled by regret. He turned his head weakly when he saw me. "Sophia?" "Uncle," I said softly, pulling up a chair. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The beeping of the heart monitor filled the silence between us. "I saw your interview," he finally said. "You said something that stuck with me. That legacy isn't blood, it's heart." He looked away, eyes glistening. "I think your grandfather would have said the same." "He did," I whispered. "And I finally believe it." He nodded slowly, the weight of years pressing down on him. "I was wrong, Sophia. I thought protecting the family name meant keeping it pure. I see now, you're the only one who truly protected it. Tears burned behind my eyes. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times. Him admitting the truth. And yet, it didn't feel like triumph. It felt like release. I forgive you, I said quietly, but I'll never forget what it taught me. He smiled faintly. Good, don't. That lesson built you into someone stronger than I ever was. When I left the room, Aunt Martha hugged me tightly in the hallway. He needed to hear that, she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. And I think you did too. 3 months later, Richard Kingsley passed away peacefully in his sleep. The funeral was small, only family and a few close colleagues. For the first time, I didn't feel like an outsider standing beside the Kingsley name carved into marble. I felt like part of something bigger. A continuation, not a shadow. After the ceremony, Aunt Martha handed me a sealed envelope. He wrote this for you. Inside was a letter in his shaky handwriting. Dear Sophia, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I hope by now you know that everything I did, right or wrong, came from fear, not hate. I feared losing control, losing legacy, losing meaning. But you gave the Kingsley name meaning again. You didn't need our blood to carry it forward. You gave it a heart. Build something better, Sophia, and make sure you pass it on to someone who deserves it. Not by name, but by soul. Tears spilled silently down my cheeks. A year later, I launched the Bennett Foundation for Future Builders, a nonprofit dedicated to funding education for young architects, engineers, and innovators, especially those without privilege or family connections. Every scholarship came with a small plaque that read, "Legacy isn't inherited, it's built." During the foundation's opening gala, a young woman approached me, no more than 19, clutching her scholarship letter. "Miss Bennett," she said nervously, "I just wanted to thank you. People like me, we don't usually get chances like this." I smiled, recognizing something of myself in her, that same spark of determination I once carried through rejection and doubt. "You don't need a chance," I said. "You just need a start. The rest you build." Later that night, standing on the balcony of my office overlooking the glittering skyline, I raised a glass to the stars, to my parents, my grandfather, even to Uncle Richard, because in the end, every heartbreak, every betrayal, every lesson had built the woman I had become. Not a Kingsley by blood, not an outsider by circumstance, but Sophia Bennett, the architect of her own destiny. "Here's to the family we choose," I whispered, "and to the legacies we build." The wind carried my words into the night, and somewhere, I swear I could almost hear my grandfather's proud laughter echoing back.